This is the How to Write Funny podcast. I'm Scott Tickers. Today I'm talking with 30-year veteran stand-up comic and public speaker Tim Clue. Tim, you are not a household name.
No.
But, you listen to interviews with household names and you can pick up a tip or two or some wisdom. But a lot of it is, well, it's easy for them because they're a household name. You're a guy who has carved out a great niche in the comedy world and other worlds related to comedy without being famous. First of all, tell us about the beginnings of your journey in comedy. You kind of made a conscious choice to not move to New York or LA. Take us back there and what was going on when you started doing stand-up.
I was just finished my work and was doing part-time teaching. Finished my work at Eastern Michigan University. And it was in the arena, the soft focus areas of communication and theater and drama. So, and I'd always wanted, I had just barely dabbled. I'd only been to an amateur night in Ann Arbor, maybe once or twice. And it went spectacularly miserable. And I still had this itch, right, that I wanted to scratch. So I lacked massive confidence. And I think there's that strange phenomena. You fail at something, and yet I was still driven while I was teaching part-time at a local community college, just improv classes and public speaking classes.
Which you focused on in college.
Correct.
Public speaking.
That's right. Exactly. So while I had this, flourishing career as a part-time teacher, making just an abundance of cash, I still had this itch that I thought, well, it can't happen a third time. I can't go and fail a third time, and I did. I was able to do it. Yet a third time, and yet eventually I went back up and had a positive experience on an amateur night.
And this is what year?
Boy, these are lucky times, and as I talk to younger comics, I'll just say I'm older than 50. Let's just put that into the wheelhouse here, but people are talking very positive about kind of comedy right now. I don't know if they refer to it as the golden age, but this is 1987. No, 1990. No, because I graduated in 87. Yeah, so it's 90. It's between 90. It's 90 to 2000. Okay, and you could not find. Maybe you could go back 3 years to find a sweeter, the sweetest of sweet spots where you could throw a rock up in the air and hit a comedy club. Somewhere in Chicago, or to be honest, anywhere in a metropolitan area, anywhere in the United States. It was an incredible time to be truly awful at something, and yet they still needed anybody to go up there who would speak in front of people and try, because they needed butts in the seats and people up there talking, and hey, they made more money if they didn't have to pay you, right?
Sure.
And the amateur night was a sweet, it's not a Ponzi scheme, but boy, it's close to it.
Right. You're not actually paying, but you're certainly working for free for a long time.
Right. And the audience is seeing less than well-crafted comedy.
Of course.
And, but they know that's the beautiful part about it. They're there to discover that gem.
So how did you figure out how to do it? Was it the typical stand-up comedy story where it was a lot of failure and a lot of trial and error? Or did you have a mentor? Did you tap into some of your public speaking skills that you picked up in college, or what was your path there?
My path is kind of funny because I was a bit of a ham and egger on the piano, and I was so petrified of just standing up there by myself. I thought, parody songs, goofy songs, those always work. So I did not come at stand up from this kind of, I'm going to do the most dangerous thing and find the most authentic self to begin to experiment with my comedy words. And, there are few and far between that are able to do that, and they do it, and they're famous. But I think there are many famous people that have probably traveled my own comic narrative.
Mark Russell, for instance.
Right. Exactly. And but what was so funny is I did it twice and killed. I mean, the songs, it is a tried and true comic mathematic equation. Funny words plus piano, and it ends, right? It has a beginning, a middle, and
It's
ends.
easy. It's one of the easiest ways to get a laugh.
Right.
Now, were you doing like pop songs or classics, or what were you doing?
No, like,
Political?
I actually remember one of my first songs was the Running movie was out. I can't remember the name of it's the English Merchant Ivory.
Oh, the Chariots of Fire movie.
Chariots of Fire had just been out. And I could play that little Chariots of Fire song, and I just wrote a parody. It's like, sure you can run far, but why not drive your car? Da 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 da. I'll go drive my car.
Simple.
Right there. So, but literally the next week, I was so excited because I thought, I'm on fire. I got it. Piano, me, together.
And they had pianos on these stages. That seems unusual.
Well, and here's where you have the evolution. I went around to all the comedy clubs. I'm like, no pianos.
What are you going to do?
No piano. So that lasted 2 weeks. My Mark Russell homage to
right. You didn't think of the portable Casio thing? That could have been a thing.
I had thought about it, and here's where I think the other property of a good. I was incredibly lazy, and I tried to do it once, and I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. I am not carrying a little piano around. This is horrible.
That was just too much. That was too big a price to pay.
Yes.
For literally. Success.
I'm like, oh, I gotta remember bringing it. I gotta find a plug-in. Oh, this is stressful. And so I'm like, all right, I think I probably just go back to standing up there and telling jokes that don't work.
But maybe that little boost of confidence you got from killing buoyed you a little bit there.
It did. I think you gotta have some losses and some wins. And you definitely need a few wins to keep you going back.
Yeah, and how long did it take you then to get to the point where you're starting to make some money at it? Like, how many years are we talking about in the trenches of doing amateur night for nothing?
I once again, this is during the 90s, and like there was, I would say there was a minimum of at least 10 to 15 comedy venues that paid, which is extraordinary. So in a relatively short period of time, I would say 6 months.
Wow.
6 months. But remember that, and I'll never forget it, there used to be these two comedy clubs. One was called Last Laugh, and Chicago comics all know this. And the other one was Big Ed. And they were like the Montagues and the Capulets of stand-up comedy. They warred against each other. They had a very different stylistic approaches to comedy. And yet every comedy needed both, Jay Burke and Big Ed. And you would just take a drive out towards O'Hare, and you could hit these two clubs, and you could perform twice, and then you could drive over to Berwyn and even hit a third club. And so you could get in one night, you could practice your 15-minute set 3 times. And I did that pretty consistently for that 6-month period.
And make what, like $25 a pop, or what were they?
Well, before, like you said, I make no money.
Oh, okay.
Or, and I'll never forget when Big Ed put me down. He said, "Come on back, I'll give you $20." And that was what you'd get a $20 bill. And boy, I can't tell you. I was more arrogant than Donald Trump when I got that $20 bill in my hand. I was feeling like something's happening here, and it's big, and it's $20.
Right. So after 6 months, he starts paying you. The other clubs start paying you, and you start scrapping together.
So
do you have a job during this point?
I'm almost always doing my little part-time, and I'll tell you, young comics, if you can get your master's, part-time teaching at a community college is just one of the finest. And now keep in mind, I was teaching a basic communication class, and I had perfected the art of, and this is for good or for worse, of the educational system, but not assigning any homework that would be a drag on my time.
Right. You limited the amount of time you spent, the sheer hours of teaching to the classroom. Nothing outside.
Nothing outside.
Right.
It was a speech class.
Right.
I mean, one time I remember thinking, I actually made the tragic error. I'm like, you know what? I need to sign a paper. I need to sign a paper. I did that one semester. I'm like, that was the dumbest idea I've ever came up with.
That's like hours.
Oh, it was hours
out of your weekend.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, you have 3 classes. That's that's roughly 70 students.
Yeah.
That's 70 papers. Do the math.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Teaching's tough.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
you were teaching during that time, making a living. Yeah.
And being strategic about how much how I structured the class so I could maximize the amount of time I spent driving around to the local comedy venues, getting as much stage time as possible. And that's that's what's so interesting about it is when you look back, it's just, it's that old Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours, how many hours the Beatles spent playing before we even heard of the word Beatles, and how they were able to basically get rid of all the mechanics, all the hiccups, all the common mistakes.
It's the process of transforming craft into instinct.
And a reflex.
Yeah, reflex, better word. So you made a conscious decision then to stay in Chicago. I'm curious to know what your end goal was with comedy. You're just doing it for fun? Were you hoping to kind of make a living locally? Because you didn't want to go all in, like go to New York or LA and get a TV show and all that stuff. I mean, you would have taken a TV show, presumably, but you wanted it to come here, to Chicago.
I did. We actually... I don't know if you'd say we were visionaries with blinders on, because ultimately our concept didn't bear fruit. It didn't bear fruit literally, right? It bared fruit as I gained information from the experience. I gleaned something from the. I wouldn't call it a direct failure, because actually I think the piece that we basically wrote and directed, a writing partner of mine. I said, you know what? Let's actually try to create a sitcom, and just do it here. This had to be 1995 maybe, and let's see if we can't just bring some energy here. And this was before any of the large studios, and I can't name them all, but there's a big one that's actually doing some really great work now and bringing lots of energy and TV production here to Chicago, which is unheard of, certainly back when I was trying to do this. But we developed a little sitcom, and then there was a festival, and we showed it, and we got a few bites, but nothing stuck per se. And in retrospect, at the time, I just wasn't savvy enough to know that you needed to go out, and you needed to go out to LA, and you needed to do a lot of handshaking and a lot of rejecting, and I actually think we would have been able to sell it if I would have been able to have that. If someone would have just said, okay, get on a plane and go live there.
Yeah, part of it is the development executives, the people who buy shows, need to know you're serious. And if you don't live there, you're not serious.
Exactly.
If you have something that's truly amazing and transformative, they will bring you there, if they see your thing. So I think that's what everybody hopes for, but I don't think it's possible to bring the mountain to Muhammad in these cases. Just doesn't happen.
No, exactly. I would.
So you didn't really know about that stuff consciously.
And where were you when I needed that advice 15, 20 years ago? Where were you?
I think I was making a TV pilot around the same time.
Yes. Right.
In Madison, Wisconsin, an even worse place to do it. But it sounds like it wasn't necessarily a conscious choice to not move there and stay in Chicago. Was it more just a lack of that kind of ambition, or what was it?
I think I'm more of, like there's Australian cockroaches and there are Chinese cockroaches. One's a daytime cockroach, one's a nighttime cockroach. And I am born of the Midwest and born of this culture, and I was incapable of ever seeing myself in any other context. Literally, you could call it sociology, pathology, you could call it ideology, or you could call it chicken shit. I think part of the craft of navigating a career is being true to yourself, but also kind of understanding how you're evolving and when There's people always talk about the right time just to showcase, who you are and what you have to offer to this bouillabaisse of talent that's being either purchased, right, or not, essentially, or being monetized or not. And there might have been a time that, in retrospect, I could have done that. I did not have. I knew deep down inside that I did not have the kind of personality to endure. I wouldn't say the rejection, because I've certainly endured a lot of rejection, but I think it's the style in which I would have had to been able to operate and endure out in Los Angeles or New York. None of those two environments didn't appeal to me. Now, with that said, in retrospect, now that I've been to New York a lot more, I really regret, you were going to ask that question anyway, weren't you? Right?
If you regret not going?
Yes, there you
Maybe.
go. No, but I do regret. I think that as a young comic, that even my persona, my grit, my stage, stage presence or whatever, I think if I would have spent a year or 2 or 3 in New York, just go there, find a $12,000 hut to live in, and just close your eyes and go and do it. That would have kind of altered maybe a little bit of my. I don't know if it would have altered my trajectory, but I just think it would have made me a better performer, a better stand-up overall. At a time at which I was really a heat-seeking missile, looking to form that craft as good as I could.
Right, at the peak of your drive to succeed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you were a guy who was too lazy to bring a Casio keyboard to a performance. So there's also an element, I think, of that's too much work.
That is the Venn diagram. That is the perfect Venn diagram. Can't bring a Casio keyboard. I like Chicago. I live in the Midwest.
Yeah.
It's where and that's the other seductress is that I was getting paid. I was starting to do well.
You would have had to start over in a bigger pond.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that the amount of energy that I put in to just become a headliner in the Chicago area, and the years it took for me to finally crack that ceiling, made it a too painful choice. And like I said, it's really important, I think, to make sure that you're keeping track of the decisions that you're making and the time at which you're making them. I think that's key to doing.
When you say keeping
well.
track of your decisions, what do you mean exactly?
So take for instance, part of the success of, I think, doing comedy and being a comic, it's kind of funny. It's kind of like that evolutionary principle that if you have too much, right? If you have too much order, the species is eliminated, and if you have too much chaos. So you need an incredible balance on the knife's edge of chaos and order. And I think the decision making, is the order, and the chaos is, I'm going out there, I'm going to find some comedy clubs, I'm going to go up on stage, and I've got my notes, and I got this napkin over here, and where did I put that one? And I love that guy. He's great. Oh, he's got something that I really like. And boy, I wish there's something there that maybe I could figure out a way, not to steal, but to, put into my thing, right? And even we all know that we're just a collection of other influences.
Right. And that's one thing I want to dig into, because you're one of those classic comedians who, I don't know if you're diagnosed or self-diagnosed as ADD. You're a guy who is very scatterbrained. It really makes for some great comedy.
What?
Yeah, it really makes for some great comedy, but it's really difficult to manage a career and make the right decisions at the right time when you have that kind of mind. It's almost a purely creative mind with much more chaos than order. So how has it been living with that?
Yeah, no, that's it. first off, I believe, I think almost any comic, all comics have some, there's something driving them to do this. So there was whether it wasn't an inciting incident, but there's something in your narrative, something in your past that you're trying to fill a void. That's the first thing, and that's universal. And the second thing is, I believe all comics are innately ADD.
I've heard that many times. Many people swear by that fact.
And that's a really interesting question. I've never thought about it in that way, but you're right. I mean, having something that's purely creative and then trying to find a decision maker part of your brain, that is, what's the movie? Your Danish Machina. The ultimate challenge.
You're talking about the biggest challenge?
Yes, that is the largest challenge that you will deal with, and I didn't deal with it. At times I dealt, and just like that creative thing. At times I dealt with it amazingly well, and then at times I dealt with it amazingly poorly. And moving back and forth, between that and finding a groove that you can stay in, I think, is a huge challenge. And if you can get that, it was funny. You're making me think about the difference between an LA comic and a New York comic and a Chicago comic, and people often talk about that. But you know what? One of the simplest definition of the difference between New York and LA comic, Chicago comics don't have management. You were laughed out of the box. There was one guy that actually had a girlfriend, and she would come into the club and he would defer to her. He's like, "Here's my manager." And I remember people like, "What? What are you talking about? You've got a half hour of good, decent, reasonable comedy. Do you want to work or don't you?" I mean, it's this, and that's the difference. And in retrospect, if I would have gone to New York, right, you find out immediately, they do exactly what's right. Is they say, you need to only focus on creative,
right,
inspirations of any kind, whether it's a joke, whether it's a script.
Let other people handle everything else.
Let me handle, right? Let us handle everything else. And then the next thing you're going to handle is deciding whether or not they're handling it. Yep. And that's the other big decision. That's the other big piece of the puzzle. That's, I think, very challenging. Oh, well, it's literally every performer I've ever spoke about. It's like, it seems like these management companies have their own kind of natural beginning, middles, and ends to them. And you need to be aware that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And sometimes that end could be a month, and sometimes that management relationship could be, years and years. But it will end.
Yeah.
Unless you're George Clooney.
Yeah, no, there are some rare stories of people who have been with their management for decades, but people are often changing management. It's like that's the one non-creative decision that a creative professional has to make who's at that level.
So did I answer your question? Because I think that's a really valid point, is that that the quicker you can get to finding, number one, sustenance, right? A sustained amount of money. So you're like on Maslow's hierarchy, you're out of safety and security.
Right.
And now you're into, I forget I know self-actualization is the top one.
Social bonding, maybe.
Yeah, there you go. Social bonding.
Some sort of fulfillment is in there.
Yeah, you're able to actually travel around, right? Right. And ply your trade, right?
Right. Because having a full-time job, something that really sucks the energy out of you, you're just not going to be able to be creative. I mean, people have done it and can do it, but it's so difficult.
You absolutely need the toughest decision you'll need to make early on is trying to find on the x-axis a job that pays money. On the y-axis, takes as little time as possible to do it,
and as little of your soul.
Yes,
so you can focus.
Energy, soul, focus, all those.
Now, on the flip side of that, somebody who stays in Chicago and doesn't move to New York or LA to sort of get into the track of, I'm going to have my own TV show, I'm going to become a name. There's a healthy impulse, I think, to stay where you are, have a family, and be a normal person. Don't you think? And the flip side of that is to be single-mindedly focused on a career in comedy and succeeding in comedy, which is really difficult to do at the same time. It's really difficult to do
I know where you're
while
going.
you're also living a normal life. People do it, but it's difficult.
And it's, yes, I forget how this quote is actually stated, but it's something to the effect of we all accept the story that we create, and we create the story that we accept. Meaning that it's my story, right? I'm here. I've been able to carve out a career. I'm very happy. I'm very pleased the way it's all worked out. But what's the alternative? That I live like this weazened old angry, I should have made it on, who wants to be a millionaire?
Right.
Right. Or I should have been on Last Comic Standing. I have a funny Last Comic Standing anecdote that I think is germane to our more substantive conversation here. It's not. I actually had a chance to audition for Last Comic Standing, but I've become a headliner at this point. I have sold scripts. I've been doing corporate entertainment, and let's just say, I clearly had the latitude to make a conscious choice. Like, well, all right, is this something that I want to do? But I was, I'm still doing stand up to this very day, and enjoy it tremendously. But so I had the opportunity. The manager of Zanies calls me up. Audition, Last Comic Standing. You want to do it? Why not? I'm a comic. I'm not famous yet. This is a portal into finding your way onto television and getting people to see and hear what you do. All right. I was like, absolutely, why not? Put a little comedy drubs on, drive down. There's a line, about 40 comics. It's a Chicago winter. It's about 10 below zero. I'm like, not going to do it. Bye. Got back in my car, drove home, and I hadn't thought about it until you asked me that question.
And there was literally none of that. There was no fear of being on a bigger stage, bigger fish.
No.
I mean, smaller fish in a bigger pond. It was all about, I don't feel like it. It's too cold. That was it.
It's too cold, and I know where this leads. I know exactly where it leads. It leads to maybe a spot on Last Comic Standing, and I did not value that. I did not value that as a career trajectory or place that I thought would be good for me, given what I had already achieved and what I had done. And to be honest, at some point, money does come to play.
Of course, especially as you get older, you can't survive anymore on the $150 rent with 5 roommates and all that.
A lot of years eating grape nuts and 2% milk. Money does become absolutely a factor.
Yeah. So talk to us about how you managed to parlay that, fairly firm footing in the Chicago stand-up world, where you're making some money doing stand-up, into other related fields that a lot of people may not think about, that are comedy business related and certainly performance related, but you've really carved out an interesting career in there. How did that come about? The genesis, some of that.
Yeah. I mean, the word organic is probably one of the most overused phrases, but it was a natural process. I'd always, when I was quickly dubbed early on a clean comic, which always bugged me because first off, it kind of carries with us this baggage. By the way, I'm going to get to your question, but I'm going long form
That's
here. It carries with it this baggage that, you might not even like dirty comedy. And I love, first off, it's like telling a musician, like, you only like a certain type of music.
Every clean comic says that. They love dirty comedy. They just made a conscious decision to, or were labeled, or just.
Well, and I believe in my case and in most people's cases, you have to, here's what you do, gang. You look in the mirror and basically the person you are tells you what kind of comedy you're going to do. And that speaks to persona. That speaks to, how do you how do you craft anything? I mean, Bill Hicks, if Bill Hicks looked in the mirror, you would automatically say, this gentleman's going to tear some things up.
Right, but you sort of look like a Rice Krispie elf.
I do, and you
need to honor that.
Yes, someone actually mentioned that I look like the cartoon character on The Incredibles, the little guy. And I thought
Dash.
Dash. So I'm trying to contemporize this frame of reference. But anyway,
Rice Krispies are still around. It's very current.
That's true.
Cereal.
They're iconic, aren't they?
Yes.
But I will forever look far more similar to one of the Pop, Crackles, and Snaps than I would, let's say, a Sean Penn.
Right. Yep.
So, so that speaks to persona, though, right? So I started. I had always done a clean-esque type of comedy, and then this was once again during the 90s, where companies started to realize, fortunately, that the motivational speaker or content provider that wasn't really capable of being very funny was not a good investment, especially for the year-end party or whatnot, and just naturally started to get hired by companies around the country to entertain. And the amazing thing, and I'll say this, is that for the early part of, it's sometimes called corporate comedy, business comedy, white collar comedy. Those are the phrases.
Or just corporate gigs.
Corporate gigs, yeah.
And a lot of people hate those. They hate corporate gigs. What is it about them that made them palatable to you?
I found that it was a large audience that would assemble, and I could do almost exactly the same words I would do on stage in front of them and get that feeling of reward and response. It was like a comedy club that you got paid 20 times more.
And they're grateful audiences because at least you're not like a super boring guy with a slide presentation.
Oh, my
You're
goodness.
Actually entertaining.
Absolutely.
So it's really a cut above what they're probably used to seeing.
Yes, it was like entering, it was exactly like entering a larger comedy club with bigger audiences.
More friendly audiences.
Friendly audiences. And, then as you moved on, you started to realize there's a craft to, every comedy club, rightfully so, has an opening act, a middle act, and a headliner. Even at Second City, they have a definite warming up device. So the first 15 minutes of your show isn't chewed up and left to the dregs. And that was part of the little equation that you needed to solve, was how could I end up being my own opener? How could I end up basically whipping these people, into a Def Jam comedy, hey everybody, with still keeping tone and narrative and style in tow, and not wasting the first 15 minutes of your act. So that was part of the evolution that started to occur, and that goes to customization and trying to expand. So that was the first thing. I was clean. I did clean comedy, and the companies literally just started coming in droves to the area of comedy and hiring people like me.
And how did they find you exactly?
Initially, it was through other, through the comedy club owners, right, and the representatives. So they would call Bert Haas or Bert Borth. Bert was one was with Funny Bone, one was with Zanies, and they'd say, "Hey, we're wondering if our vinyl company would love to have someone come out and entertain them. Who would you recommend?" And I was on the short list because apparently he thought I was clean, and he thought I could entertain.
Yeah.
So that's the first phase. That was the first step. I'm reminded of what a massive opportunity those people missed, because eventually corporate agencies and bureaus started to proliferate. And they literally just swooped in and took over that business.
And the comedy club owners could have had that, you're saying? Yeah.
Why are you a comedy club owner? You're not doing comedy. So you've already opted out of, you obviously love the entertainment world, right?
Yep.
You obviously have some management skills. It's stunning in retrospect that they were getting all these calls and they didn't hook
Yeah, they
one
just
plus one
didn't
together.
leverage that into a thing.
So yeah, if you go online right now and you can type in the words corporate comedy, and basically you'll see about 100 different links pop up with agencies of all kind that represent the biggest names in the business to someone like me.
And then another thing that you started doing, you mentioned you sold a couple of scripts. You started doing some playwriting and sold a play, and that's an area I think a lot of people don't think about. Probably don't even know about. They just assume that theater is a long dead art form where it's not possible to make any money. But you wrote a play that was performed, and now it's part of this ethereal world of scripts that community theaters or whatever can find and decide, oh, let's put up this play. And then you get money for that.
Well,
I'd love to hear about that.
Well, and that's what I mean to write a little bathroom comedy book, or of course to what you did on a larger scale with bringing the Onion to the coffee table. But believe it or not, what happened was the evolution of that was we'd just barely broken through on. We'd just gotten a screenplay, not a screenplay, sorry, a TV script, and we had management, and we were in the queue. It was a show called Ed. People might remember it. It was on NBC. It was produced by David Letterman, and they had purchased our script. We made money, and then this was my jumping off point. Essentially, there was some weird little nuance, contractual thing that one of the actresses had as a writer, that she would do no references to something that we had referenced in our script, and they literally, yep, sorry, done. We bounced your script.
Sure.
And at that point, I'd been working on it for I've been writing screenplays and pilots. I've been doing it pretty hard for 5 years. And at that point, I'm like, this is stupid. I live in Chicago. I can find a way to see my work live. I can see my work being done. I can write it. I can craft it, and then I just went on a tear to do that. And I've been with one writing partner pretty much my entire creative career, and I said, let's go do this. And that born Leaving Iowa, which was eventually published and is being reproduced and is in a nice little surprising check that arrives 2 or 3 times a year.
How do you make that happen initially? Like who buys it? Who publishes it? What is the sort of key into that world?
Yeah, I mean, what's really nice for young playwrights out there? There are a lot more small publishing companies that will give you your but you have to do the work. I think a play is much closer to sculpting than it is to painting on a canvas. So you have to get out there. I think you have to bring it to life. It has to physically live. You
stage it so you can see what the problems are and fix them. Yeah.
But then you literally, once you feel that you have the piece that you feel proud of and that you feel says what you wanted to say and breathes in the way you wanted to breathe, you call up a publisher, a local publisher.
And they don't expect agents to call. You can just be a comedy writer on the street with a script, and they'll.
If you have worked hard enough to get that physical product into a venue somewhere in Chicago
or anywhere,
and
that's right. Not hard.
It's not hard.
Yeah, even community college stage.
Absolutely. Proof is in the pudding, and you know what? That takes that in and of itself is. I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's difficult for some, right? And a young publisher, a publishing company, in our case, it was called Dramatist. They had heard. No, we had a few very lucky things occur. Jeff Daniels had is the kind of executive director, grand poobah, and funding for a theater called Purple Rose Theater
In Michigan.
in Michigan. And he's one of these rare people. I always, whenever I mention him, I have to say. So he worked out of the Circle Theater in New York, and was influenced by that incredible collaborative, experience that he had. And then he just went back to his own hometown in Chelsea, which is about 20 minutes outside of Ann Arbor, maybe 25. But it is a town, maybe 3,000, and built this beautiful theater, and kind of as homage to the Circle Theater that he was so influenced by as a young man. And then staffed it with very talented people, from actors, the directors, and whatnot. So they had a play that they didn't feel was doing as well. We were just stumbling along, developing it in Naperville at a high school auditorium, and they had one of their staff call up and said, "Hey, we'd really like to take a look at the Leaving Iowa script." And here's a case where, back to what you spoke about, that attention deficit disorder and the management of how do you make good decisions if you're also hell-bent on just creating. And here was one of the cases where, maybe, I don't know if it was time, maturity, or fear. I didn't say, I said, "Can we have 2 weeks?" I said, I do not want to send you the script right now, because I knew it was not fully formed. And they said yes. And that was, of course, lit the fire. We were able to finish our development, rewrite it, submit it. And the thing that we submitted was so drastically different than what we would have submitted them if we would have seen it. So that ultimately ended up to be, not breaking my own arm off, but a little sage wisdom that fortunately floated down on me, and I was able to pull at that time. So they produced it, and then we directed it and produced it in Chicago, and that led to a publishing offer of like I said, a small press, and now it's done kind of throughout. It's done. I think we have finally achieved. It's been performed, I think, in every state in our union.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. So, one last thing, Tim. When I found myself in the position of needing to learn stand-up comedy quickly recently, I did a crash course and had never done it before in my whole life. Never been on stage, only written.
And yet, but you've been crafting comedy in every form, style.
Been in just about every other medium.
In every medium you could possibly imagine.
And
directing and writing, of course.
Yeah, I turned to you to mentor me in this very brief, 2 to 3 week crash course of stand-up comedy. And you were a genius stand-up teacher. You just had so much insight into what's working, what's not, how to fix it, how to do it, how to remember just all these little things. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for, first of all, you should be teaching stand-up. I don't know if you are.
That would be my ode to Shelley Berman. That's what he did in his third act, and was quite wonderful at it. And people said he was tremendous.
Actually turned it into a performance, it was entertaining.
No, Shelley Berman taught young comedians.
Oh, you mean the third act of his life?
Third act of
I
his
thought
life.
you meant of his show.
Oh, no,
I was
no,
how did he do that?
Of course.
Gotcha.
No, the third act of his life.
Yeah.
And
but I would be remiss if I didn't ask for your top 5 tips for improving stand-up, because kind of everybody goes through the phases that they think you're supposed to go through, which is 10 years. Louis C.K. says 15 years of going up there, doing jokes, honing them, and continuing to do that before you really get good at it. And I wouldn't say I was good, but you got me to be pretty passable.
You were
in
it was
3
amazing.
weeks.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
if anybody could benefit
you
from
have
those,
video that can prove that you were good.
I think people could really benefit from a little sliver of the wisdom that you had to share with me. So your top 5
Sure.
tips for improving stand-up quickly.
I don't know if I'll have 5, but let me just tell you the things that changed my own understanding of the craft. You've already named the first one is doing it, but the second thing is thinking about it, and that's undervalued. That the minute you do it, you have to think about it. Some people like to record and rewrite. Some people like to just write and rewrite. I don't think it matters. But you have to do those two things. Next, and the best advice I ever got was that as much as you need to think about creating, you need to think about eliminating. And I think comics don't think about eliminating, because now you're speaking to persona and perspective. And a simple piece of tangible working advice that a comic gave me, he said, write down 3 characteristics that you think identify who you are on a card or on your arm. Write them down somewhere. And then every time you come up with a joke or a premise, I want you to go back and look at those 3 words.
That's a good one, because persona is one of the things that takes the longest to figure out, because who knows who they are? Nobody knows who they are. That takes time. And that's a great tip, because if you constantly remind yourself of who you are and only tell jokes that fit that, you're really going to supercharge what you're doing.
It's the difference between the first draft and, as I always tell people, the Glass Menagerie was rewritten 13 times. And a play that's been finally honed and looked at and collaborated is that. So the next tip, I don't know if we're on 4 or 5. But
just keep
the
going.
next tip would be self collaboration. Will not answer all the problems that you have. So you have to become both the writer, right, the director, and the producer. So first off, understand that you're doing all 3 of those things in your brain. And that, it was very funny. I was just listening to a show the other night with Larry Wilmore, and they were asking, Terry Gross was asking, what brought you to who you were? And I know it sounds cliche, but he is right. He's like, man, you got to drive towards being yourself and try to find that combination of it's authentic, but it's funny. And that
another Venn diagram, or it's an intersection.
Right? Yeah, that intersection. That's why it's art, man. Because I'm being authentic. Well, no, you're not. You're authentically recrafting what is an evolution of what you think you can say best that demonstrates why you're worthy of being on stage telling jokes, right? And so, I don't know. I guess the other thing that is that don't be. And I think young comics are much better at this than some people in my generation. And I'm going to get to my premise here. People would see like a guy with a guitar up there, and they'd be like, "Oh, well, of course he's got a guitar. Why? Of course he's killing. He's a good-looking guy." No. You know what? He's doing exactly what he should be doing. Like I said, he's doing it brilliantly. And I never watched, and here's my advice: never watch a performance and be incapable of diagnosing why that's working. What is this person doing that's lighting this audience on fire? In other words, comics by our very nature are these cruel. We have to be cynics. We have to hate as much as we love, and these things have to live in the kind of a natural, communion of each other. But don't let your cynicism and that negative part of you dominate the insight part of you, and that is being able to look at a performer and say, "Wow, okay, he's doing something that I should think about." Now, don't. In other words, just because he's juggling doesn't mean he isn't funny.
What about confidence? Do you have any tips? Because that's another one that takes years and years and years. What are some shortcuts to stage confidence?
I was the worst. I was the worst. I still am. I don't know. Radical self-acceptance. You have, and radical self-acceptance. Just get a
No matter what's happening to you, it's okay. No matter what you're doing.
yes. I find that the younger performers, though, they almost bug me. I have persona envy there because they all seem. I mean, I was so wrapped in. I was so insecure. I'll never forget this. Rich Scheidner. Take a look. I mean, during his heyday, he was one of the best. And he just crushed at the Funny Firm. It's this 400. It's during the heyday. People are standing up. And my writing partner says, hey, you want to go meet Rich Scheidner? And I'm like, well, yeah. And I literally had the tone of like, I'm not worthy. I can't. And I remember standing there and he's like, hey, my buddy who was friends with Rich, he's like, hey, this is Tim Clue. And I handed him like 3 fingers. I couldn't even form a complete hand because I was so in awe and inundated with how tremendous he was and what he had done that particular night. And cut, paste, and repeat that just again and again and again in terms. And I see, and I tell you, that's what I love about the younger comics is that they kind of come at you like, hey, like we're a peer relationship right now. I don't see that they suffer from that. And to their credit, I think it's why we're seeing a lot of good stuff happening out there from like a Dimitri Martin, stuff like that.
I wonder if they just got a lot more praise as kids, because I think in our generation, kids were not helicopter parented. They were the opposite.
Right.
We were a nuisance. And I think
that's a really good point. It's like, I didn't tell my parents I was doing stand-up for like 3 years. That was the best kept secret. And I know young comics that invite their parents to see their show 4 weeks in.
They know how important it is to be supportive, so they're there and they're laughing.
And it's wonderful.
And that's a new thing.
Yeah, it's a new thing. You're right.
That did not happen.
I think we just tapped on some interesting generational.
Yeah. And that leads me to, what is the hole that you were trying to fill? Like, why did you turn to comedy?
I grew up in a small town, which is a deprivation tank, and it's like living in a desert. And so I was trying to fill that void of the need for something stimulating. My dad owned a bar. My mom worked in the factory. Classic, greatest generation blue collar people. They worked their butts off, and then we saw each other once every other week. And when we saw each other, it was great. But I could never say that that I saw them enough.
Evolution had selected you to create the entertainment, to
Yes.
fill the entertainment need of that community.
Yes.
Because you did it in school, you did it at home.
Yeah, I was definitely, they're usually comics either fill 2 different voids. There's the introvert that knows what's funny and begins to find their craft a little later. But I was definitely an extrovert and a bit of a goofball and experimenting with every borscht belt form of comedy that ever existed.
Well, good stuff, Tim. Appreciate you chatting with us.
This is great. This is fun. We should do this again.
We'll do it every week.
Every week we'll have this conversation.
Thanks for listening to the How to Write Funny podcast. As I mentioned in this episode, Tim took me through a crash course in stand-up comedy a while back, and what happened was I was given a chance to open for my friend Ben Bailey, who was doing a comedy special, and I had never really done stand-up before. My whole career was behind the curtain, behind the scenes. I was a writer, an occasional voice actor, but that's it. Now, most people who learn stand-up take like a decade to get good, but I had to get passable in 3 weeks, and Tim helped me through that. It was an incredible experience. He taught me so many valuable things, and I learned so much about how different stand-up is from doing any kind of writing or pre-recorded script-based performance-type comedy. He taught me how to generate good material, how to memorize it, how to read crowds, how to handle stage fright. So much great stuff. He gave me the equivalent of, I would say, 5 years of hard knocks in clubs in the space of that 3 weeks. It was amazing. If you want to hear the whole story, go to howtowritefunny.com and read the blog article I wrote about the whole experience. It's called My Crash Course in Stand-Up Comedy, and it features the final video of my performance for that DVD special and it lists a lot of the great tips Tim gave me. I think they could be really useful in your career, almost no matter where you are in terms of experience level. Just go to the blog at howtowritefunny.com. Hope you enjoy it.